What's up, guys? This is Coach Wilson back with you today. I'm off today, so I thought I'd do another video. Today, talking about the differences between beginner, intermediate, and elite athletes. And so, what we need to understand as both coaches and athletes is that in order to get optimal results and to reach your highest potential, at the end of the day, the goal should be to keep that progress going, keep that momentum going. It's important not to sacrifice things in the short term for the bigger picture, long term results that you can get. I see a lot of people really trade in short term results for long-term growth. And I think that that's a huge mistake, but unfortunately one that we see often in our sport of track and field, and especially with sprinters from what I've seen. So in order to really reach your potential, you have to have not only just like a couple of month or a year or 2 year plan, but you really need several years planned ahead, at least in some shape or form. It doesn't mean that I'm going to have workouts, 4 or 5 years ahead of time. That's not what that means. But it means that what I'm doing these couple of months builds into what I'm trying to do this year. And this year builds into what I'm trying to do over a span of maybe 4 years. So keeping those things in mind is vital. It's crucial. And certainly, the younger you start, the younger kids you're working with, the longer you have to plan ahead of you. And so you really, no matter what level you're at though, you really gotta think about, how does what I'm doing now fit into the grand scheme of things. So for beginners in general, I think it's good for beginners to have exposure to a lot of different things. The training is going to be more generalized because when you're a beginner, pretty much anything is going to make you better as a beginner. And it's important to pick up various skills that are going to help build one another. I mean, if a young athlete has exposure to different things, chances are they're going to eventually funnel into something and be pretty good at it. So, younger athletes need to do a little bit of speed work, a little bit of tempo running, a little bit of, drill work, a little bit of plyo work, a little bit of strength or med ball work, but not really hyper focusing on any one thing, but just, again, exposing to different things. It's the same thing that you do with younger kids who are in school. You want to expose them to different types of things so that you gradually develop your interest. And of course, then you start focusing on things. As you get into high school, you might want to focus on different classes. As you get into college or whatever, then you really focus into a certain skill set, a certain major or whatever the case may be. But the same thing should be, I think, the same approach should be taken in athletics. And unfortunately, one problem I see with beginner athletes is that they are hyper focused and hyper specialized from the beginning of their athletic career a lot of times in this day and age. If someone is a track athlete, a lot of times they are a track athlete their whole life and that's it. Same thing with kids who are in football or baseball, soccer, whatever the case may be. A lot of times we just see them, I see a lot of soccer kids do soccer seasons like 3 types of soccer in 1 year. I think there's like indoor and there's outdoor and then there's summer or something along those lines. But I think it's a lot better for young athletes, beginners, to do other sports. As a track guy myself, I think it's good. It's important for them to explore other sports, but to not hyper focus on one too much. Over time, of course, you'll specialize. So, other than that, with beginners, it's just important not to overdo anything with them, because that's going to enable them to be more healthy over a longer period of time. The more repeated bouts of movements, the more stress you're going to impose on particular areas of that athlete. I mean, if the athlete is only playing basketball and that's all they do, then chances are they're going to have, some maybe jumping related injuries, whether it's something along the lines of shin splints or other knee problems, Osgood Schlatters, things of that nature could happen. And similarly, somebody who just does long jump or high jump, they're just a jumper all year round, indoor and outdoor, summer, so those problems are going to come up more often if that's all you do. But if you kind of mix things up and bounce around a little bit, a kid does maybe football in the fall, he does track during the spring, does AAU basketball in the summer, or maybe just has the summer off, chances are they're not going to have too many like overuse injuries. So that's something important to keep in mind. But always giving the athlete opportunities to excel at something, because you never know what sport or what event they're going to really take off at. So as the athlete progresses and they start taking off a little bit and they're more of like an intermediate level athlete, I would say that it's hard to give an exact age or year for them for you to say, okay, they're intermediate, but generally it would be the second half of high school, I would say, going into certainly through college. I'd say most of them are going to be at an intermediate level, even if they are really good, because they still have room to improve likely at that stage. With intermediate athletes, you're going to get more specific, but again, you still don't want to get too specific. So by that time though, for the most part, when somebody's like a junior or senior in high school or they're in college, chances are they're going to specialize in one event. Am I a fan of that? Usually no. For most people. It just depends though. There are definitely some individuals who probably should focus on their sport at that point. But I still think it's good to always have something else to bounce off of so that you're not running into overtraining. But if you're doing it right, then there's really nothing wrong with it. I just see way too many people doing way too much. I mean, the amount of racing that some kids do is enough to really put them into burnout, to put them into plateaus. It's the variety that kind of keeps you fresh and prevents you from plateauing and prevents you from burning out. So, and another consideration should be psychological burnout. You don't want to psychologically burn yourself out from the sport to where it feels like work and you hate it. So, and every athlete's going to be different. There are some people who can eventually go into it all year round, all the time. Some people are going to need their summer off, So that's something important so that the athlete can recharge their batteries and perform at their best. And it's just going to vary. But what I will say about intermediate athletes is that that's the level where they are going to need more specificity. And not only that, but they probably need the most coaching at that level. What I mean by that is beginners don't really need a lot of like cueing, let's say. They don't really need a lot of specific instruction on, how they need to move technique-wise and everything. Why? Because a beginner is literally just not strong enough explosive enough, coordinated enough, experienced and skilled enough to reach ideal mechanical positions. And a lot of coaches don't understand that, and they pound this stuff into the ground into kids. They pound, drive your knees, this and that, whatever the cue may be. And the athlete simply isn't strong enough to keep their hips high enough over the ground, to where a lot of times they cue the athlete and it makes things worse. The higher they try to drive their knees, the lower their hips drop, because they aren't strong enough to handle that type of a position. So often it just makes things worse. So it's important not to even really focus on cueing with young athletes. That's not to say that you would never do it, but it's very rare in my experience. You let the training do the work for you. If the athlete is getting stronger, more coordinated, more explosive, more elastic over time, then at the end of the day, a lot of the form issues are going to start sorting themselves out over those first couple of years. Now it's when they're kind of in that mid-range of skill development. Now they're strong enough, though. If they've done that type of work, now they're explosive enough to be able to get their hips high enough to where they can be in a good position. But without the proper coaching, without the proper cueing, they might be in a poor mechanical position to where they're overstriding. Young kids aren't even strong enough to really overstride. By nature, again, their hips aren't going to be high enough. But an athlete who can get their hips high enough, they're going to be able to be strong enough to be in a good position or strong enough to be in a bad position. So that's why it's important to be able to make those adjustments at those intermediate middle levels. And in doing so, you also have to keep in mind that they still are going to need not just the specific training, but you don't just completely drop the general stuff. They need general fitness, they need general strength, they need drill work, they need all the basic fundamentals still. And you want to obviously be gradual and progressive about how you incorporate these things. So, you honestly might not really want to include a lot of B-skips early in an athlete's career. I know I don't, because I think that you need more hip height to be able to do them properly. You're trying to cycle the leg through, and if you're trying to cycle the leg through and the hip is just too low because the athlete's not powerful enough, then they're just going to be clawing and reaching and grabbing the ground no matter what you cue them. So you're just wasting your time in cueing an athlete to get better B-skips, in my opinion, on those early years. Now, when they're an intermediate athlete, that's when I start including stuff like that. And you might want to consider things like dribbles and, just other drills that are more technical, like the running bee. Nobody really talks about that or knows what that is, but I have seen Coleman do them and a few others. It's rare that you see it, but the running bee is just doing the B-skip position, but you're cycling through it. You're just going right into it. You're just cycling instead of skipping. So, it's similar to a dribble, but it's a little bit different. I would say a dribble is more bouncy, whereas a running bee is closer to sort of sprinting. But at any rate, more technical drills is something that you're going to be able to include, I think, at that intermediate stage, and you can begin working on technical corrections. And I would say that's the level where you're going to have the most technical corrections, because that leads into advanced athletes, elite athletes. Elite athletes they're so good that the technical corrections are going to be minimal at that level. They are so explosive and so powerful that they're likely going to be reaching very good positions pretty much automatically. Like, you're not going to have to make major tweaks in an elite athlete's form. You're just not going to have to. They have the horsepower, they have the engine, they have the firepower to where things pretty much fall into place. Again, that's not to say you're not going to have to make some small corrections here and there, but if they're healthy, if you're not overworking them, the training is correct, it's specific to what they're trying to do, then for the most part, their form is going to fall into place. And so that's why you're going to make more corrections at the intermediate level than you are at the elite level. Because at the elite level, the athletes seem to know very much well what feels right and what doesn't anyways. Intermediate athletes, it's a little more vague. They just don't quite know exactly what it might feel like to do it right. Because they're used to, as a beginner, you don't know what feels right either, And so as you become an intermediate athlete, it's just a little bit foggy. It's a matter of things start to feel easier, I would say, as you get better. You don't feel like you have to put as much effort, or you don't feel as much pushing, because as you get faster, your ground contact time decreases. As you get faster, there's a good chance that your air time might decrease too. And the air time decreases because I'm traveling faster through the air. Instead of floating through the air, I'm traveling faster through the air. So as these things take shape, but by the way, I should also mention that some people might have more air time though. Some people might really bounce when they're a beginner, but as they develop and they get more explosive, then they cover way more ground through the air. It just depends. But regardless, it's about trying to get the athlete to connect with the sensation of what is correct. And so for an elite athlete, it's easy for them to feel those things out. For someone who is intermediate, again, it's just somewhat unclear sometimes. But I would say that's where you do the most coaching, is at the intermediate level. At the elite level, you are just kind of managing things more or less, making sure that the ship doesn't hit an iceberg, basically. Damage control at that point. That isn't to say that you don't have very specific technical work that you need to do, but as long as the athlete is getting the work that they need to do for their event, then likely a lot of things are going to fall into place. Now, as far as the strength work, I would say that the intermediate level is where you're going to probably see the most of that, because you're not going to gain a lot of benefits from a beginner being in the weight room all the time. They do, they should have strength work. They do need to do some type of weight work. But they don't need to really focus in on it anyways, because they're only going to get so much better from it because they're still young, they're developing, they probably haven't hit puberty, especially the males. And so you're only going to get so much from spending hours and hours in the weight room. It just doesn't make sense to do a whole lot of it. But you should have some exposure. It's just gradual increased exposure. So for intermediate athletes, that's where they're going to really be able to take off and do a lot more. They've got a lot of the basics and fundamentals, and so they're going to be able to spend more time though doing weight work, doing speed work, doing all this type of work. And so that's where you're going to see the most progress and the most probably volume, I would say, is somewhere around the intermediate to late intermediate stage as they start becoming a advanced elite athlete. That's where you're doing the most, but it'll start to taper off as they are elite. Because at that point, they're already pretty explosive, strong, and powerful. And for the most part, you just need to maintain. You'll maybe have some slight increase in their strength numbers and all that, but generally, you're just trying to kind of maintain it. The track work then really becomes the priority more than anything else. Hitting the numbers on the track as an elite athlete is what it's all about. Because at the end of the day, all these elite athletes are putting up pretty similar numbers in the weight room for the most part. So it's not like you're going to gain an edge out of that. Now, an intermediate person, for someone who's not doing the weights correctly and they're not putting up the types of numbers that they're capable of, yeah, you can have an edge as an intermediate level athlete. But as a elite athlete, again, everybody's going to be super similar in terms of that. What the difference is who's healthy, who's elastic and dynamic, whose training is specific to what they're trying to do. It's at that point, you're just trying to sharpen the knife. You need to sharpen the knife. That's all there is to it at that point. And what I mean by that is just touching up on all of your specific skills. So that's the gist of that. Aside from that, I would mention that past the elite stage, or maybe you were never an elite athlete, but you're a master's athlete, you're an older athlete. What are some of the considerations for that stage? I would say what happens is, for one, you need to cut out the things that are not necessities in your training. And that's still truth for anybody else, as you become intermediate, as you become elite, you should start cutting some things out that are not useful so that you can get more recovery in. Because as you become an intermediate athlete, you need more recovery. As you become an elite athlete, you need more recovery because you're performing at higher levels. The intensity is higher. The impact on your body is higher. As you become a master's athlete, even though your performances are dropping, you still might need increased recoveries with particular workouts, especially when you're doing speed work, specific intense work. That type of stuff is gonna take a toll on you if you're an aging athlete. And so it's important to have higher recovery times for most things. Now, for tempo work, general fitness work, for the most part, that stuff can remain the same. But you're probably still going to want to increase the recoveries. You're going to minimize, though, again, some of the things that aren't necessary. Like at that level, you might find that plyometrics really take a toll and beat up your body. So you may want to scale back on that or cut it out altogether if it's giving you problems. But what I find is that as you become more of a mature master's athlete, you're going to start going backwards and including some of the things that you might have dropped out. So let's say that you were doing a lot of strength work and then you started cutting back on it as you became higher level, elite, you just maintained. You may have to get more volume of strength work as you become an older athlete. It might honestly be more in the terms of, depending on your age, of course, but it might be more of muscle building at that point. As you age, we tend to just lose muscle. So that's something to think about maintaining as you age. And so a younger athlete might be doing more muscle building work, sets of like 3x10, things like that, in that range. So as you become a higher level athlete, you're not doing as much muscle building work. You're looking at more of 3x5, 3x6. It's just kind of random numbers though. But generally that's what happens. You focus on heavier weight, but low volume. And as you mature, you may need to reincorporate some of that 3x10 more muscle building type of work. And you may also need to include more general fitness. I mean, if you're not going to be able to dedicate as much volume in your endurance training, your speed work, you can dedicate that energy though into tempo work, into general fitness. And as your metabolism slows, you probably are going to start needing more of that. So, I would say that you may not be doing huge sessions of tempo still, but you should be trying to do it pretty frequently. Whereas if you're a very high level elite athlete, like there are days where you may need to cut out tempo altogether just because you've hit like such a great workout. You hit some really great times. And so if you've hit really great times, it may be worth it to have an extra off day or even another one in your week, depending on if you reached a really good performance. The recovery is really worth it. For an older athlete, you can probably get away, since you're not hitting those types of performances, you can get away with doing tempo more frequently and not just get away with it, but benefit from it. Especially if you're only doing like 1,000 meters worth of tempo or something, several days a week. If you can do that consistently, you're probably going to be feeling better if you're an older athlete. I mean, as I've gotten older, I'm obviously not super old or anything, but as I've gotten older, I've noticed these trends myself. And so that consistency goes a long way. But I would say that generally you would do less plyometric work, and you're going to scale back a bit on the amount of speed work, the amount of special endurance, speed endurance work. You're just not going to be able to handle quite as much of that. So you fill that in though, mostly with strength and general fitness. So it's like working backwards to closer to beginner stages. So I think that you need to keep that in mind as you progress if you're a master's senior athlete. But yeah, that's all I kind of wanted to cover in this video. Just to sum up, again, the major points though. As you progress, always have a long-term plan in mind. You can sometimes make yourself better in the short term, but it will oftentimes cost you in your long-term plan if you try to do too much volume, too much intensity in one given season. There's been situations where I could make an athlete better in a given year and make them faster, but I would refrain from doing so because I would do things in the training in a gradual and progressive manner so that they can improve next year, and they can improve their entire high school year, so that they can improve their college career and hopefully pass that. So that's always what you want to keep in mind. Never do too much too soon. Gradually becoming more specific, not over specializing at a young age. As far as technical instruction and cueing an athlete, you're going to use less cues with beginners. You're going to use the most cues with intermediate athletes, and you're going to use less as they become elite. And obviously with somebody who's a master's or a senior athlete, they're not going to need much cueing because they've done it their whole life. They're really not going to need any, really. And so that kind of mirrors a lot of what you would see with a beginner. So again, yeah, intermediate's where you're going to need the most coaching though. You're going to have the most increases in your speed work. You're going to have the most technical work. Going into elite athletes, actually, I should say, you're going to have the most technical work. Intermediate, you see the most increase, right? It's rapidly increasing. You're starting to make some jumps. Now, if you're already elite, the curve of volume starts to level off. And yes, you are at the highest possible intensity at that point. So at that point though, things are pretty stable though. And so you're not going to need to cue as much. You're not going to need to really change up the workouts a whole lot. Whereas things are constantly changing at that intermediate part of the curve, and at the beginner and at the tail end of, masters and all that, you're going to find some similarities. So I hope this helps. Let me know if you want me to cover a certain topic. If you have any questions about sprinting, or honestly, if you want to ask about other events, I've coached hurdles and jumps and pole vault, and I've coached all kinds of things. And if you have strength and conditioning questions, whatever you want to ask that's related to like track and field, go ahead and ask them. Definitely like some more ideas from you guys. So go ahead and put those in the comments. I appreciate your time watching these videos. So hope this helps, and give me your feedback. I appreciate it because I want to do better at what I'm trying to do too. So if you have any suggestions, just let me know. All right, thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate it. Have a good one.